If you think the rating on your sleeping bag is going to keep you from freezing your butt off, think again. We're going to get into all the things that make up a sleeping bag rating. So why is it that I can take two 20-degree rated bags out on trail and have two completely different experiences? At first I thought I was crazy. And yes, maybe I am a little crazy, but not for thinking that I'm using the same bag. In fact, I think the companies that make these bags are the crazy ones. Let's jump into some of the technical details and what that number on your sleeping bag actually means. First off, there is no regulation that says a sleeping bag company or an outdoor company that makes sleeping bags has to put an official rating by a third party on their bag. That just doesn't exist. If I wanted to take paper towel and make a sleeping bag and stamp a 20-degree on it, it wouldn't sell well, but I could absolutely do it. And maybe there's some legal loophole that I don't know about where that would be wildly against the law, but there is no third party guardrailing these sleeping bags. So let's get into what actually does exist. What the number should actually mean if everyone was playing by the rules. What is the temperature rating on your bag and how to properly use that to your advantage when you're headed out in the backcountry. The temperature rating on your bag is not the comfort level, and I think that's the biggest misconception that I see with new hikers or even some experienced ones, that if I buy a 20-degree bag and it's 20 degrees, I should have a great night's sleep. That is absolutely not true, and unfortunately, that will ruin your night. The degree rating on your bag is different for every company. Some of them put the comfort rating on their bag. Some of them put the limit rating on your bag, and some of them use that as the extreme limit rating. Now, all those terms are exactly what they seem like. The comfort rating is what a comfortable night's sleep base minimum would be. The limit rating is the limit to what you would want for a threshold night's sleep, and the extreme is basically a survivability metric. Originally, these numbers weren't just pulled out of thin air. There were two standardized tests, the EN and ISO, that are still in existence today that use a very standardized way of performing temperature ratings on these bags, and then they get the stamp of approval, and most modern backpacking outdoor companies use these certifications. However, some do not. And it's not that every company has to use these certifications. There's actually some really reputable brands that stamp on their bag, and I guarantee you that it's at least that good, and they do not get their bag either ISO or EN rated. Let's talk a little bit about how they perform these tests to get these ratings, if they do so choose to do the EN and ISO. Now, this isn't exactly the gold standard because there's some really interesting things that happen when they're doing these tests and how they come across these numbers officially. First of all, they are running these numbers with the mannequin bundled up in very warm clothing and a beanie. Now, I take a beanie and sleep with it. I even use a gaiter for the back of my neck when I sleep. That's just something that I really enjoy and helps keeps me warm at night. I can always take it off. But to test like this is, in my opinion, a little misleading, because if someone's slightly underdressed to the test, that's going to be detrimental to them. These tests, in my humble opinion, should be base level clothing. The other thing that this test does that I find a little interesting is they test at a little over 5 R value for the sleeping pad. Now, if you've been around backpacking or even sleeping bags or technical gear long enough, you understand that a good majority of the heat that comes from your night's sleep is through the sleeping pad. So if you have a terrible sleeping pad and a great bag, that's not a recipe for success. You could have a mediocre bag and a great pad, and I would guarantee you that's going to be a better night's sleep. So in these tests, they're testing with a fairly exceptional pad because most ultralight pads are not in the 5+ range. Yes, you can get some. Yes, there are some exceptions that are very expensive that exceed that R value and are relatively light. But to baseline test off this with fully clothed in warm clothing with a head cap or a beanie and have a 5+ R value pad, to me seems a little bit misleading, and I think creates some distrust when folks go out and have a miserable night's sleep and they spent a lot of money on an ultralight, highly rated bag. So how do we avoid a miserable night's sleep on trail and select a bag that's right for us? First and foremost, I think the easiest way to make sure that you're not getting duped by these companies is to go on their website, and every single one of them publishes their process, or should. I know some of the very budget brands don't do this, but most of them, if not all of the reputable brands, have something published about how they make their bags, how they get their ratings, and you can see what testing they do, if at all. And like I said, for some of the companies, they don't do ISO or EN testing, and they stand behind their product, and there's a handful of them that go that direction that are really good. So I'm definitely not saying the EN ISO ratings are everything, although most of the big hitters in the industry use those numbers, but we've also got into why those numbers aren't exactly the gold standard. Once you've gone on a company's website and kind of discovered how they go through the process of making and rating their bags, I think the next thing to do is to read reviews from fellow hikers. One of the interesting things for me, and I don't want to put this company on blast, but it's a big name company. I bought a 20 degree synthetic bag. I paid a lot of money for it. And I have a bag that is $150 less than that bag with the same temperature rating, and it is night and day, no pun intended. And it really comes down to the little things. They design the bag with little extra ways to insulate heat, and I've had some of my most comfortable nights on trail with a bag that costs less than one that is ISO rated and has a very reputable name. So let's get into a little bit of the features and how we protect ourselves from having a very cold night out on trail. The first thing we can do has already been previously discussed a little bit, and that is selecting the right pad. Before you start off going to select a sleeping bag and assuming that's going to solve all your problems, you definitely want to make sure that you're pairing it with the right pad in two different ways. The first way is to make sure that the R value is congruent with the recommendation from the manufacturer on the degrees for your bag. There are some bag companies that will give you a rating and they're predicating it on an R value from your pad, and if you don't hit that minimum threshold, you're going to have a less than desirable temperature. The other thing too, and this is really underrated, is a lot of the bags now have mechanisms for the pad to stay attached to the bag. And if you roll around in your sleep like I do, or you're a side sleeper, having that attachment point is going to keep you from being miserable in the middle of the night when you roll off your pad and now you're getting zero insulation and relying solely on your bag and a very cold tent floor. There's some things once you have a great bag that you can do at home to make sure that you don't ruin it and that you keep the integrity of the bag as high as possible. An easy mistake that I see a lot of beginners do is they come home from their trip, they take their bag in the stuff sack all compressed out of their backpack, and they throw it in their gearbox or their closet. You cannot do that. I know synthetic holds up a lot better than real down, but you want to make sure your bag is completely uncompressed and hanging in the closet or wherever you hang your bag so that it can expand again. It gets a lot of its R value from expanding to its proper size, and when you keep it stored compressed like that, it really does degrade the integrity of the bag. So make sure when you're done with your trip, take that bag out of its stuff sack. That's why most of them come with expansion nets, and you hang that thing in your closet or wherever you hang your gear. Lastly, I want to leave you with a really important tip that I could have used on certain nights out on trail early on when I started hiking, and that is pack for the worst expectation. I know that seems like a very obvious thing, but how many times I've been out with a group and one person in the group brought a bag with a temperature rating that's either from a company that clearly publishes something that's wildly inaccurate, or they prepared for the extreme limit when they should have prepared for the comfort limit, and they end up having a miserable night's sleep. One of the things that happens once you've reached that point in your night out backpacking is the solve for that at minimum requires you get even colder. And what I mean by that is you're sitting there shivering or uncomfortable in your sleeping bag in your tent in the middle of the night, and the temperature you went to bed at is much different than the temperature it is currently in the middle of the night, nearing peak coldness. And in order to solve this, you have to get out of your bag and make a fix if you can even do that. And so that presents a whole host of different problems. You're leaving the only warmth you have in effort that you'll get warmth in the future, and it's so much better to prepare. And I always go into my sleeping bag with more clothes, more preparation than I think I need, and I can always take a beanie or a layer off in the middle of the night and go right back to sleep. A few tips if you reach that point of chaos in your backpacking trip. If you have a way to heat water and you have a Nalgene bottle, this is a very well used tip. You can boil water, put it in your Nalgene bottle, and tuck it at the bottom of your sleeping bag, and you may get a couple hours of additional heat out of that. That has saved many of folks from a horrendous night of sleep. Another tip or trick that I use that I've already mentioned is a gaiter. The neck loses a substantial amount of body heat if your sleeping bag does not have one of the guards that go around the front of your neck. You can wear a gaiter to bed, or even a gaiter and a beanie, and retain a lot of the head neck heat. Even if you have a mummy bag, the front of your neck is a place where you can lose heat, especially if your bag doesn't have that feature. My last tip is super underrated, and that is set up early. Set up when it is not cold, when it is not dark. I know that we don't always have the luxury of doing that, depending on how our trip is going. But if you can immediately set up your sleep space, your tent, your pad, your sleeping bag, you're going to figure out problems while there's still daylight before you're shivering, before you get into finding wood or food or whatever you're doing that evening. And so by having this early setup, you can assure that you are properly ready for bed, and whenever that time comes, you can crawl in with plenty of preparation. And again, the two things that you can do to ensure you do not have a miserable trip: protect yourself from going cold and going hungry. I will do another video at some point on trail eating and how snacks and calories and salt work together to make sure that you stay hydrated and well fed on trail. Preparation is worth tons of tons of after. Thank you all for coming along. Again, my name's Wes with Daddoesadventure, and I appreciate every single one of you. And I hope that if this video has given you something, that you would do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. Have an awesome day, y'all.